Matthew 2, verse 1. Now when Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, in the days of Herod the king. Now notice the word king. What do you see? The pronunciation on king has a lower K, not a capital K, because Herod is a lower king. Behold, there came wise men from the east to Jerusalem, saying, where is he that is born? See this king? That's a capital K, king of the Jews. For we have seen his star in the east and are come to worship him. Now, this is a nitpicky thing, but I think it's important. The Bible sets up right here in the story just giving you the appetite for who's important and who's not. Herod thinks he's important. So you know what all the modern versions do? They reverse it or they destroy it. In the Southern Baptist version, the CSB, they say capital K for Herod, King Herod, and lowercase k for King of the Jews for Jesus.
How could they do that, though? He's King of the Jews. I mean, come on.
They do it because they want to put the importance, well, the devil's behind it.
Yeah.
The devil wants himself to be important, just as we'll see Herod does in this story. NIV does this too. King Herod, they put a capital K. King of the Jews for Jesus, they make it a small k. ESV, they do it consistent. They make both of them lowercase. So nobody's more important than the other. In the NET, that's the New English Translation, that's you'll see that. That's a new popular one. They do the same thing. They make K for Herod capital and the K for Jesus, King of the Jews, a lowercase. Well, that's not my God. My God is capital over everybody. And the real Bible sets it up that way. Let's keep reading. Verse 3. When Herod the king had heard these things, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. And when he had gathered all the chief priests and scribes and people together, he demanded of them where Christ should be born. And they said unto him, in Bethlehem of Judea, for thus it is written by the prophet, and thou, Bethlehem, in the land of Judea, art not the least among the princes of Judah, for out of thee shall come a governor that shall rule my people Israel. Okay, I'm going to give you just a little background on Herod, because when you get a little glimpse of who Herod is, it helps make the drastic comparison between Herod versus Jesus Christ, even as a baby. In that would be before BC, before Christ, 47 BC, Antipater, a man named Antipater, that was Herod's father. And he was appointed as governor of Judea. He worked for a Hasmonean. I can't go into all the history of this or we'd be here for hours. He worked for a Hasmonean, which they came after the Maccabees. So they had that Edomite Jewish relationship going. And so the Jews recognized the Hasmoneans as being, part of their blood. They recognized that, and they felt like they were getting some sort of royalty out of a Hasmonean. Well, Herod was not a Hasmonean, but he worked for one. And that man, this is back, they didn't use the Bible. The Jews quit using the Bible. They started appointing priests instead of pulling them from Aaron's line. And that was the Hasmonean priest. It was an appointee. And he, of course, has his secretary, which is Herod's father, as governor of Judea. And this, of course, Rome gets involved in. And then in 44 BC, Caesar is assassinated in Rome. Okay, that causes all kinds of turmoil in the region. In 43, Antipater, Herod's father, is assassinated. So Herod, like the good con man he was, stepped right into his father's position without having been assigned it officially from Rome. But Rome was in no position to assign a role. They were going through a great catastrophe in Rome. They had a civil war going on. They had Caesar was just assassinated. So they've got great turmoil. Well, Herod said, well, I'm not going to wait on them to figure things out. I'm going to step in and take power now. And that's exactly what he did. The Battle of Philippi takes place in 42 BC. That's between Octavian and Mark Antony. You'll know those names. Mark Antony is the famous warrior, and he's always political, trying to steal the throne or set somebody on it. Octavian, you might or might not recognize that name. That's Augustus Caesar. His name is changed later, and we'll get to that in a minute, but his name is later changed to Augustus, but it starts out his real name is Octavian. Octavian confirms Herod as governor of Judea, finally, when things settle down in Rome. In 40, Herod is driven out by a Hasmonean prince. He decides, I want Judea back. We used to have priests that came from the Hasmonean line, and now this Herod guy is in there running things, and I want to run them. So he comes in. He can't come in by himself, so he pulls in help from the Parthian Empire. That's northeast of Israel and Syria. And so they come down, and they're taking over things. Well, Rome's not really in a position to help. They force Herod to flee. Herod is exiled from Israel. So he runs to Rome. Well, he's going to ask Rome for some help. The Roman Senate appoints Herod as King of the Jews. They give him this title and say, go back, we give you our approval. You'll be known as King of the Jews. Yes, it was. The Jews didn't have any say in it. God didn't have any say in it. No priest, no scripture. Just the Romans claim he's the King of the Jews. In 37, Mark Antony wins against the Parthians and hands Judea over to King Herod, and he tells everybody he's King of the Jews. Then he has to do something politically. He's seen the great turmoil that has happened, so he decides, hey, I can fix this with a marriage. That's the way they did things back then, was they would marry in and create a bloodline in order to appease a certain class of people. So he marries Miriam. She was a Hasmonean princess. Okay, now he's going to appease the Jews because now he has a wife that came from the line they liked. Okay, this is his second wife, though, not his first wife. His first wife, Doris, and her son, Antipater, he exiles. Great man, isn't he? He's a sweetie. In 36, Herod appoints Arstibulus, however you say it, Aristobulus, Arstibulus III. This is his new brother-in-law. He appoints him as high priest in Jerusalem. Now, the Jews accept it because he is a Hasmonean. And now Herod is part of this family. So you see, he's getting in and, doing all the deals and being a real politician here to appease everybody. But he's in it for power. He's just power hungry. In 36, Herod appoints his new brother-in-law, the high priest, but it wasn't long before Herod became jealous because the Hasmonean did more than he had intended. He suddenly garnered all the love of the people, and Herod was feeling left out. He overplayed his hand now. So, somehow in 35, his brother-in-law ends up dead in Herod's pool. Well, Herod ruled it an accident, so no problem. Don't look any further. In 32, Herod fights a revolt in Nebatea. Now that is east of the Dead Sea. This was his mother's family, side of the family, and it had been controlled by Rome, and his father had control of them. But now they see, just like all the nations did back then, there's trouble in Rome. If ever we're going to revolt, it's time now, and that's what they did. Well, Herod's in a bad spot, because if Rome's having trouble, Herod doesn't have an army. He's got to depend on Rome. Well, now if these people are going to revolt, who's he going to get any help from? Nobody. He just got to go over there and try to strong arm them. It didn't go so well. Let's see. Herod's in a revolt, and Rome's in this civil war with Mark Antony again, Octavian, which is Augustus Caesar, and Cleopatra. You know the story of Cleopatra. That's what's going on right now, and Herod can't get any help. Well, you remember Herod. If he's going to side with somebody, who you think he's going to side with? He's going to side with the person who helped him gain his position. For him, he thinks that person is Mark Antony, because the last time around, that was the person who handed him the government, came in and took it from the Parthians. So he's siding with what turns out to be the loser. Mark Antony loses, Octavian wins. He's in the middle of a revolt with with his mom's family. And politically, he's on the outs. So he does what any good politician does. He decides he'll make some new promises and, kiss some new rings and, play nice again. So he runs to Rome and flatters Octavian as much as he can, and Octavian finally falls for it and says, okay, you can return and we'll give you support and help, and we'll give you this title, here it is again, King of the Jews. They keep cramming this title on his head. Not that he didn't want it, he did want it, but he's not particularly interested in the Jews, he's interested in power. But it's this name that keeps coming up.
Keep giving him an empty title for him.
Yeah. He has, when he comes back, he has Miriam, his wife, who was the Hasmonean, executed. He trumped up some charges of infidelity against her. He was tired of her. Well, things had probably soured between he and his wife after her brother died. Accidentally in the pool. So now he's decided they had a fight and he's going to end it, and he did. He had her executed. Nice guy. The Roman Senate in 27 decides they're going to pay homage to their leader, Octavian, and they award him a name, Augustus Caesar. That name means something. It says this, the one worthy of worship. What a name. No. So now we have almost, you can see the Roman Catholic influence, where they get it from. Here they're saying our leader is the one worthy of worship. No, sir, there's only one worthy of worship. And he is the King of the Jews. He's the king of everybody. Well, Herod has, just made up with this new Caesar that's on the throne now. And so to prove it, he builds him a big old city. What he does is he refurbishes and rebuilds Samaria and calls it Sabate. That's a whole city that pays homage to nothing but Augustus Caesar. They were real flatterers back then. And everything was, extreme and extravagant. Yes, right. In 25, Herod does something that appears to be nice, finally. There was a big famine in Israel. And so he waived the taxes. Nobody has to pay taxes this year. And he gave out grain free food. Well, now he's won back the favor of the people. The people had begun to wane after he killed the Hasmonean wife he had. Now they're back, he thinks, because he's giving out grain. See this constant struggle and pursuit of power he's in? Then in 23, he builds his palace, and Herodian. That is a fortress outside of Jerusalem, man-made mountain and a fortress on top of it. And then in 22, he builds Caesarea Maritima. That is on the water. It was a great engineering feat. He found a way to lay concrete in water and underwater.
Oh, wow.
It's just it still is there today. It's mind-blowing how he could figure out how to do that. Probably the devil. But anyway, that gave him another claim to fame. People loved that. He builds in 20, he builds his temple, and the Herod temple, and that's a famous thing. And that was finally dedicated 10 years later in 10 BC. In 8 BC, Herod accuses 2 of his sons of treason. He's a nice guy. And then the next year he executes them. Whew. In 6 BC, he begins opposition against the Pharisees. Wow, he doesn't like the Pharisees had this problem in his eyes. They were too literal. When you're literal, and the Pharisees were very literal, we only walk so many miles, and then you have rules. Mm-hmm. And Herod doesn't like rules. Herod likes to make the rules. So he and the Pharisees didn't get along too well. This is about the time of the birth of Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ comes along right at the end of Herod's life. In 4 BC, he kills the son of his first wife, Antipater, because the same problem. He's paranoid. Maybe he's causing treason. I exiled him, so he's probably thinking up some plan to get me back. So he kills him. Augustus Caesar said this about Herod: "You're better off being Herod's pig than his son." Sons didn't last very long around Herod's palace. Herod finally dies in about 4 BC in Jericho. And that's his life. It's just a constant struggle and turmoil and a fight for power. Then after he supposedly had power, it wasn't enough. He had to keep beating people off because he was paranoid somebody was going to steal it.
So he died before Christ was born?
After. Remember, we're BC, before Christ, before death, before Christ's death. So that 4 BC would put it, that's about the birth of Christ, they tell us. Now, time gets a little funny back in there because they're trying to figure out the AD, BC, Common Era, all those time frames, and you got to give it a leeway of a couple of years either side. Herod finally dies in Jericho, and they say that he's very diseased, and he smelled, and his body exuded the diseases he was eat up with. It was God killing him is what it was. And so anyway, now we're back to the Bible. Let's see how the Bible reveals him again. In Matthew 2, look at verse 7. Then Herod, when he had privately called the wise men, inquired of them diligently what time the star appeared. And he sent them to Bethlehem and said, "Go and search diligently." You can almost hear him putting on the act. "Go and search diligently for the young child, and when you have found him, bring me word again, that I may come and worship also." Now, the thing about an imposter, a fake king, is this: they feign humility. He didn't want to worship anybody. He wanted everybody worshiping him. That's right. And if he even had the suspicion somebody was not worshiping him, related to him, son or not, he would kill them. So him saying he wants to come worship, if you knew Herod, you knew that was wrong. He didn't want to worship nobody. But he's going to feign humility. Look at verse 12. And being warned of God in a dream that they should not return to Herod, they departed into their own country another way. Well, good thing. Now these people had come from the east. So maybe Herod thought he could get away with telling these people that, hey, I'm going to come worship. And maybe he put on a good act for them, and they didn't realize, he's really bad news. But God told them, hey, don't go back there. That's right. In Psalm chapter 12, verse 2, the Bible says this: they speak vanity, every one with his neighbor, with flattering lips, and with a double heart do they speak. The Lord shall cut off all flattering lips, and the tongue that speaketh proud things. That was Herod. Herod was saying, I'm going to come worship him too. I'm a worshiper. Watch out. That's fake. Now, we're just naturally born to think that we're the king. That's the way we come into this world, thinking I'm number one. Everybody needs to worship me. It's all about me. It's not. It's all about me. No. We all we all have that natural inclination to everybody needs to worship me. And life should teach you very quickly that no, nobody's going to worship you, and you've got things you've got to obey and rules you've got to follow. But if you're born into royalty, how do you get it? That'd be pretty tough. That's up to your parents to instill in you if you're born with a silver spoon in your mouth. Okay, well, here it says one way you can identify it is with flatterers. They're going to flap their lips and tell you good things you want to hear, but it's all about them. That's the only one they care about. And you see it amongst people every day. If they're not out and out boasting about themselves, they're engineering the conversation in such a way that you give them a pat on the back. Don't you just get sick of that? That's what Herod was. In Luke chapter 20, verse 20, Luke 20, verse 20. Herod's not the only one who had this problem. It followed Jesus all around. Luke 20, verse 20. And they watched him and sent forth spies, which should feign themselves just men, that they might take hold of his words, that so they might deliver him unto the power and authority of the governor. Well, he wanted them to get a hold of his words. If they had really gotten a hold of them, those words would have changed them. Those are some good words to get hold of. However, they weren't doing it because they wanted to understand his words. They were doing it because they wanted to trap him and kill him. Herod was in the same boat. Not only do fake kings feign humility, fake kings demand help from idiots. And that's a fact. Look at it. You will go to the crowd you think is going to tell you what you want to hear when you want advice. You won't go to somebody knowing they're going to give me an answer I'm not going to like. Because most of the time, we already know what we should or shouldn't be doing. We don't need a second opinion. But many times we go run to get one, and we'll go run to somebody who'll tell us what we know we want to hear. Or like Herod does, and like Nebuchadnezzar did, you run to people you think have answers, but they've never proven to have answers. In Matthew 2, look at verse 3. Matthew 2, verse 3. It says, when Herod the king had heard these things, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. And when he had gathered all the chief priests, who are they? Nobodies. Remember, he's been appointing these priests. Why would we put any trust in them? The chief priest and scribes and the people together, he demanded of them where Christ should be born. He didn't ask them. He wasn't playing nice. What happened to I'm going to come worship and all this? Now all of a sudden he's dropped his mask. These are the people that are the home people. They know him. So he doesn't have to put on an act. And for them, he demands, you tell me where he's supposed to be born. In Malachi chapter 2, Malachi 2, verse 7. It says, for the priest's lips should keep knowledge, and they should seek the law at his mouth, for he is the messenger of the Lord of hosts. Herod didn't say, what does the scripture say about the Messiah? He didn't say, teach me. He said, where's he born? I want one bit of information from you and no more and no less. And that's all he wanted. Well, we can't do that with the Bible. Many times people do that. They say, okay, today I'm feeling depression. So let me ask that great saint Google. Give me some verses on depression. And then we go look up those verses on depression. That may not be the verses God wanted you to have. It may have been the ones you thought you needed. Herod thought he needed to know where he was born. The priest should have known enough of the law and the scriptures to be able to tell him, that's not what you need. You need to know that he's going to rule with a rod of iron. You submit or you'll get smashed. That's what they should have been telling him, but they didn't. In John chapter 3, John 3 verse 10. John 3 verse 10. Nicodemus, here, this is Nicodemus. He's supposed to be a knowledgeable bigwig, and he's the doctor of the law. He's a great man. Jesus is asking him some questions and stumped him. Verse 10. Jesus answered and said unto him, art thou a master in Israel, and knowest not these things? That's the problem with going to people who supposedly know everything, or the ones you think know all the things. We need to get the word direct from God. We know he knows the answer. These people, King Herods, the imposters, and sometimes we look in the mirror and it's King Herod looking back at us. These fellas will ask the wrong questions because they're dull of hearing from pride. You listen to pride. Pride is one of those things that make you feel good. And pride is some of those earphones you can put on, but what happens is that volume gets turned up so loud you won't be able to hear anything else. That's Herod. In Matthew 2, look at verse 2. Here's what the wise men told him. Matthew 2, verse 2. Wise men show up in town, they say this, saying, where is he? What's that? That is, present tense, born King of the Jews. They gave him some information. They said, he's already been born. Where is he? What does he say? Verse 4. And when he had gathered all the so forth, so on, he demanded of them where Christ should be born. As though he's waiting on it to happen. He can't listen very well, can he? The people who told him about this just told him he's already been born. That's right. Herod says, where's he going to be born? He can't listen. He's got a problem. That pride will get in there and eat you up. He's a fake king. Fake is the way you describe the rest of the world. Without Jesus Christ, we miss the genuine article that makes us a living being. Without that, we're dead in trespasses and sin. Everybody walking around is an imitation of life. They're not really alive. Not only that, fake kings reject honesty. There's something powerful about truth. It just is. Because it represents righteousness. You can't put trust and make lies a refuge. That's a fragile thing to lean on, because you don't know when it's going to crumble. But Herod's built his whole life on lies. Look at it in verse 8. Matthew 2, verse 8. And when he had sent them to Bethlehem, he said, go and search diligently. What are they searching for? For the young child. And when you have found him, bring me word again that I may come and worship him also. Here it is again. He cannot force his lips to say the thing the wise men told him. The wise men showed up and said, "Where's that baby that's born King of the Jews?" That smacked Herod right in the face. He had been over to Rome 3 times, been through a hard-fought struggle to get that title. Now these out-of-towners show up and say, "Hey, we heard about some baby called King of the Jews." We didn't hear about a Herod called King of the Jews. He's mad. He can't force those words to come out of his lips. So he says, "Where's that young child?" Instead of King of the Jews. He knew he was the King of the Jews, but he calls him a young child. That's revealing. Why is Herod so scared of a child? Our passage said that Herod was trouble in all of Jerusalem. No, they weren't. Herod was. He was scared to death that the real King of the Jews had just showed up. And he didn't have to get Rome to give him a title. He was born with it, King of the Jews. That's a scary proposition. The most powerful man in all of Judea was in a panic at the news of a child being born. What's to fear? A child is harmless, undefiled, and separate from sinners. Everything Herod wasn't. Furthermore, the real fear for Herod was this: Jesus was holy and soon to be made higher than the heavens. That would scare you. In 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 26, he says this. 1 Corinthians 1:26. "For you see your calling, brethren, how that not many wise men after the flesh, not many mighty, not many noble are called." The ones this world considers great, and Herod considered himself great. History gives him that title, Herod the Great. He didn't claim to be great. He claimed to be King of the Jews, because the real King of the Jews is great. Paul told us, you look around and the world's idea of greatness is not who God chooses. When Jesus Christ showed up, he was the best thing this world had ever laid eyes on, both physically and spiritually. But, just like Paul informs us, he was rejected because fake kings can't stand honesty and purity. In Luke chapter 9, verse 22, Jesus was rejected of the professors, the bigwigs, the smart people, the wise men of this world. Luke 9:22, saying, "The Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected." Now, here's the class of people that are going to reject him. Of the elders and chief priests and scribes, and be slain and be raised the third day. All the wise men, the people you would go to for education, they're supposed to know everything. They're rejecting Jesus Christ. Not only that, the pupils reject him. In Luke 17, verse 25. "But first must he suffer many things and be rejected of this generation." Just a regular Joe on the street. Not many mighty. The Jews always knew they were superior to the rest of the world because that's the way God had created them at the time. And as far as they were concerned, we don't need this King of the Jews. We've got one that gives us political clout in Rome. They didn't accept him. Not only that, he was rejected as what he was in truth, the potentate. That is the head of everything. In Luke chapter 20, verse 17. Luke 20, verse 17. "And he beheld them and said, What is this then that is written? The stone which the builders rejected, the same is become the head of the corner." Now, you might not recognize it right off, but what Jesus is telling them is he's the King of the Jews. That verse right there is telling them, I'm the head of this whole nation. Let's find it in its original penning, and then we'll see it. It's in Psalms 118. Psalms 118, look at verse 10. This quote comes from David, Psalms 118, verse 10. All nations compass me about, but in the name of the Lord will I destroy them. Israel's destroying all these other nations. Look at verse 22. The stone which the builders refused is become the head of the corner. David's saying, my nation is going to rise on top of all the others. That's the same verse Jesus quotes. I'm the head of all of this. I am the King of the Jews. But he was rejected by everybody down here. Well, that doesn't mean much when you really have all the authority and power. It's not enough to have one or the other. You've got to have both, authority and power. He gave up power to give man free will. But when man of his own free will rejected him, soon he'll return with both power and authority and reject anyone who rejected him. In our story, we found that the wise men showed up. The wise men had one job to do. Show up and inform the king, there is a real King of the Jews. That was a small mission for them to do. That's all God wanted them to say, and then leave town. That's what we're supposed to do. If we're wise, we'll show up to the kings of this world and just give them the news. The king is here. He's in town. Go find him. You need to be worshiping him. And sometimes that Herod that you got to tell is the one that looks back at you in the mirror. But tell him off. That's what a wise man will do. Now, don't you think it's strange that there weren't any wise men in Judea? The only wise men that showed up were from afar. That tells you something. Now, the shepherds showed up, but you would expect a shepherd to, because the chief shepherd was finally in town. That's right. Supposedly anybody could have seen it. It was up in the sky. All of Israel should have run. How about this? The scribes and the Pharisees who told Herod where Jesus was going to be born. How come none of them showed up? They weren't very wise, were they? They were in it for their pocketbook or the prestige of power. Yeah. Bunch of losers in town. That's what was in town. The kings of this world don't realize they've usurped the true king's throne. They have to be told. That's our job. It's not our job to decide that they've accepted or rejected the message. Ours is just to put it out there. God will use it any way he wants. In Matthew chapter 2, look at verse 1 again. And when Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, behold, there came wise men from the east to Jerusalem, saying, where is he that is born King of the Jews? For we have seen his star in the east, and are come to worship him. There's something associated with Jesus Christ. It's a star. You know, if you're going to be a wise person, the Bible compares that to being a star. In Daniel chapter 12, verse 3, he says, and they that be wise shall shine as the brightness of the firmament, and they that turn many to righteousness as the stars forever and ever. That's Daniel 12, verse 3. A Christian should appear to this world as a bright spot. And your wisdom, that's not yours, it's God's wisdom, is this, turning people to righteousness. And that makes you a star. In God's sky, that does. In Proverbs chapter 11, verse 30. Proverbs 11, verse 30. It says, the fruit of righteousness is a tree of life, and he that winneth souls is wise. Now, that verse has been applied to many different things in many different ages. The most current way it's been applied in the church age is people who are soul winners, meaning they tell people how to get saved. And that's true. I can apply that there. Obviously, it has more meaning than that, because you wouldn't have done that in the Old Testament in Proverbs. So it means telling a person to turn from wickedness and turn to righteousness in any form. If it's for salvation or if it's for sanctification. That's turning them from wickedness to God. That's helping a soul. In Matthew 2, look at verse 11. Matthew 2, verse 11. And when they were come in into the house, they saw the young child with Mary his mother, and fell down and worshipped him. And when they had opened their treasures, they presented unto him gifts, gold, and frankincense, and myrrh. Wouldn't you have liked to have been in that scene right there? See what those guys brought? It really meant something to them. They traveled a long way. And these were treasures that they wanted to impress the king with. And they brought them. I imagine it's going to feel the same way when we get to heaven. We're going to see some real treasures because God will be handing them out. And we'll get to watch as people hand them to Jesus Christ. When you're a kid at Christmas, you want to get the presents. As you become older, you enjoy watching the kids open the presents. In heaven, we'll enjoy watching Jesus receive gifts. If we've got some to give him, we'll enjoy that too. In Daniel chapter 12. Daniel 12, look at verse 10. Daniel 12, verse 10. Many shall be purified and made white and tried, but the wicked shall do wickedly. That's the world. And none of the wicked shall understand. They're going to be stupid. But the wise shall understand. We're going to get some wisdom. The wise men understood how to find Jesus. They understood what the star stood for. They understood when Jesus gave them a dream that he was really saying, leave old Herod alone. Don't go back there. But he says right here, the world's going to get wickeder and wickeder. I know that's not real words, but more and more wicked. And as it does, those that are wise are going to stand out brighter than they ever have. God's going to give anybody who lacks wisdom if they simply ask for it. He said he'll give liberally, and he won't reprimand you for asking. Not a braid. Okay, one day we'll be standing in the presence of pure righteousness and holiness, and we'll be made, according to our verse, white and pure, purified. In the meantime, let's give the light to as many people as we can. Some people are going to be a Herod, and you only give them the message once. Some people you can go back to many times. These wise men were wise because they didn't go back to him. They told it once and left. Had they gone back and said, I got to get this message through, they would no longer have been wise men. They would have been disobedient men. So let's follow the story. That's our story of Herod the great imposter.